Hello guys, welcome back to the video updates. It's Sade. Today I've been asked to talk about the situation where somebody's trying to sell property, but there are some title issues because one of the spouses died and the remaining spouse is now trying to sell that property. And the question in this case also involves children from a different marriage or prior relationship. So the spouse that died had children that were not born from this particular marriage and not children of the surviving spouse. So this question comes up a lot because people assume that because they're in a community property state such as Texas, that the property would automatically be inherited by the surviving spouse once the second person dies. And this is actually a misconception because we have to look a little bit further. And that's why it's always important to have a consultation with a lawyer. And this is why it's always important to have a consultation with an attorney that understands the real estate laws, because there's a crossover between real estate and, of course, probate issues or inheritance issues. So you have to have a lawyer that understands fully and is able to do the analysis for you before you start listing that property. Because in the scenario when somebody dies without a will and the spouse is not the father or the mother of the deceased spouse's children, or is the father or mother of some of them but not all of them, that triggers the intestacy laws. And the intestacy laws are those laws that we look at, the default laws that are looked at when somebody dies without a will. And in order for you to know whether that surviving spouse would be able to get that property, you need to know whether all of the children are born to the two spouses, or whether some children born to another relationship, and if so, was that child adopted into this current relationship, So those are questions that the lawyer can address for you, but I'll go over the question in this video within the small set of facts that we have in the airtime that we have. So in this scenario, the realtor was trying to sell the real estate for an elderly client who thought that he had inherited the property from his spouse, meaning that he does officially own half of the property because they're in a community property state and they purchased that property together during their marriage. However, half of that property would have been owned by the deceased spouse. And because they have children from a different relationship, the deceased spouse had children prior, the laws here in Texas, the intestacy laws here say that all of that deceased spouse's children will get her half of the property. So all that time over the years that the surviving spouse assumed that he had full control and ownership, he was actually wrong. So he went ahead and hired a realtor to list the home. The realtor didn't know the laws, so he went ahead and listed the home. And then when they opened title with a title company, which is what happens when the buyer is trying to get a title policy, right? The title company is going to research the records and look at the documentation. If there's somebody that passed away that was untitled, they need to see the inheritance proved up. And the way that is proved up is usually through probate court if the person had a will. If the person had a will and it was a long time ago and it was never probated, there are other ways that you could do it as well. You could also go through probate court still in some situations, or you might be able to get away with doing an affidavit of heirship at that point. But something has to be done. And so the title company's attorneys would look at the file and they will flag it because they have question marks all over the thing. And so in this scenario, the realtor was asked to produce the children of the deceased spouse because they had to also agree to the sale and get permission from them, of course. And he was only able to find two children. The third one would have been that child that was from a previous relationship, and she happened to be out of the country. And so the two children that were born into the current marriage, they don't really know where the third one is that was born to a different relationship. They don't really have a relationship with her, and they couldn't find her. So that's when they approached my law firm trying to figure out what can we do to satisfy the title company. What can we do to satisfy the title company where we don't have to go through a long process because this elderly man, he's trying to close on this property and get his money out. Well, that raises another question, because I explained to the realtor that not only do they have to approve the sale, they actually own half of that property. So whatever numbers you were quoting your client were actually incorrect numbers as far as what profit he could make from the sale or how much he could get from that sale, because he only can get 50% of the net profits, not all of it, as you guys had discussed. And that was kind of surprising to the realtor, because they don't fully always understand all the legal stuff. And even attorneys that don't work in this field are not going to understand all the time, what would be the result of this particular set of circumstances. So I explained to the realtor that only half of the net profits or proceeds will go to his client that he has, even if we sorted everything out, which was a surprise to him. And then the other thing that I explained to him is that the title company is not going to let us just get away with, filing something into the property records. We could try it. I would be happy to help them that way, but the title companies always want a court order in this scenario, and I would explain to you why. Because whenever the sale is done and there are proceeds left over, that title company's escrow officer can only hold the funds for so long. They're not going to hold the funds from this year until 5 years later when that child comes back from overseas to claim it. So they don't want that kind of liability. They don't have any kind of provisions in place for handling that. What people are supposed to do in this kind of situation is to then go to a court and get a court order, not only permitting the seller to sell, without having that signature from that other child, that he will be able to sell the property, but also the proceeds for that child's share will be held by the court in the court registry, so that it's all done above board. They don't want anybody stealing other people's money just because the person is not around or because they're estranged. So the court would hold the funds as long as they need to until that person shows up. If that person never shows up, yeah, of course, the funds would eventually escheat at some point to the state, I would imagine. But all of the time, the proceeds have to be accounted for, so that in this case, it's actually a 3-step process. First, the heirship has to be proved up, meaning that who are all of the children of the deceased person, and also then the appraisers will have to come in and testify, usually in court, to explain that they're selling the property for a fair value. So they'll support the seller in justifying to the court that the buyer that they have under contract or the amount that they're listing it for is actually fair, so that people don't do underhanded stuff like pretending to sell it for $100,000 when it's actually worth $300,000, and then they'll go back and get a cut from the buyer. So people do shady things sometimes, so that's why all these provisions are in place. So first they have to prove heirship, and then they have to prove fair market value, and then they have to finally get approval to sell it, and then the division will be done. Let's say this deceased person had 3 children, then 50% of the sale proceeds will go to the surviving spouse because he owned that part. And then the other 50%, which was owned by the deceased spouse, will go to all of her 3 children, the 2 that are in the United States and the 1 that is missing. So the court will then divide the 50% into 3, and a third of that will be held in the court registry. So before the sale goes on, the bottom line is the title companies would like to see a court order saying that it's an order approving sale. And then an accounting will be provided after the fact for the money, and the money will be deposited directly from the escrow officer into the court registry. So that's all that I have on that particular question. You could definitely get a private investigator to try to find the heir that's missing, because it will make your life easier. Maybe they'll sign it over without wanting any of the money, because sometimes people don't care about the money, but most of the times people do care about the money and they want their share. So that will be the only option available to you. If the will was available but was never probated maybe 10 years ago, and in Texas, the time frame to probate a will is supposed to be 4 years. So some of the time the lawyers can open some form of proceeding that still allows that order to be admitted, just to be able to clear the title to the property. So you'll have to get a probate lawyer for that. We don't handle those things. but I know some probate lawyers that are able to do that. So just talk to lawyers in your state if you come across a situation like this, whether you're a realtor, a seller, a buyer, or one of the heirs involved in the whole thing. So nobody should be listing property without first making sure they have all the parties, but sometimes they just don't realize it until it's too late. And they have their hopes up as to whether they could move ahead with the sale. They're already under contract, and they also have their hopes up as to how much they would net from the sale. Anyway, I hope this video has been helpful to you as always. Thank you for watching, and if you like what you've seen, please click like. If you love the channel or at least find it useful, make sure to subscribe so that we can continue to send you notifications of our new videos. Thanks as always, and I'll talk to you next time.